What's up, informed mystics? Welcome back to the High Priestess and the Hierophant with your co-hosts, Erika and Drew. And today we kind of want to talk about the importance of altered states to the mystic. So it seems to us that the best way to even try to tackle this topic as much as we can in one video is to start with sort of defining what we mean by altered states. So Erika, I'm going to give it to you first.
To me, an altered state is any state of consciousness that isn't like my waking, normal conscious state of being in this world and operating in this world. So that can come in the form of dreams. It can come in the form of what they call active imagination, astral journeying, trance, anything that shifts your perception out of your typical interaction with reality. I feel like it's hard to define, but
no, I said any state of perception outside normal mundane reality. And I think you did a great job at defining what we're talking about. And for me, a way that's a little bit more easy for people to grasp, because that's honestly, if you don't know, other than dreaming, but if you've never done astral work or journey, if you've never done any of these things, it might seem very abstract and you won't understand. It's like grasping at straws. So for me, another way to define this in a more sort of logical way is that what we're talking about can actually be measured. Like you can measure someone's brain waves and you can see that they are in an altered state of consciousness. They are not in a normal waking conscious state. So those, they could be dreaming, they could be in a heavy meditative state. It could be several different things. But essentially, you're not in normal reality. You're not in this, like what we're having right here, a normal conscious state.
I think a common state that everybody's experienced that is a good example is daydreaming. Like when you get sucked into a fantasy or a daydream, like you're sitting in school waiting for the bell to ring, it's a classic one, and you go, or you're in a boring meeting at work and you get sucked into this daydream, and then they ask you a question about the financials or something and you're like, huh, what? That's that you were in an altered state of reality because you weren't there. Or when you're driving and all of a sudden you arrive at your destination and you feel like no time passed, and you stopped at all the stop signs and the stoplights and you changed lanes and everything, but you weren't really there. It was
right. I mean? It's not even that you're unconscious, which obviously you're unconscious when you're asleep, but like you're just in an altered state of, you're not fully in the mundane reality for whatever reason. I think those are really good examples. And I would say that there are levels, like there are layers to how deep you can do this. And I would also say, like, when I talk about altered states of consciousness, there are times when I may as well not even know I have a body, but I'm not asleep, right? And like, there are other times where I am fully aware of my body, but I'm not really in that space. Like during a shamanic journey, a lot of times I'll be aware of my body. Almost always during astral work, though there are times where I kind of lose touch with that, I'm kind of aware of my body. You know what I mean? Having a fantasy, you get involved in that, but you still may have some awareness that you're in the real world and that things are going on around you. So I think that there are varying degrees and layers. Again, you could probably define that more clearly with the whole measuring of a brainwave. But right. I think for regular purposes, we're not all sitting around measuring our brainwaves, right?
No. And I think to me, the state of awareness, like your consciousness, is really important in that, you're choosing where you focus that conscious awareness. So if you're focusing the conscious awareness in your physical space that you're in, or in your physical body, or in the intellectual space that you're in, be it a conversation or a problem that you're solving related to this reality, then, those are states of consciousness that I associate with like being in a mundane reality. But if I use that state of awareness to shift into, a fantasy or a daydream, or what they call in union circles as active imagination, would be like daydream with maybe the purpose of healing or the purpose of spiritual work. It's using your intention and your conscious awareness to shift into another state of consciousness to do that work. And that's why, it's an altered state of consciousness, because your focus, your, awareness is elsewhere other than, like you said, in your body or physical environment. And like I said, I would add, because there is an intellectual state that's more mundane, like, what am I going to make for lunch kind of thing.
And I love that you use that term awareness. I think that is something that people can relate to. I think that most people who will be watching this content have at least done guided meditations. And during that guided meditation, somebody will say, bring your awareness to the base of your spine or to your toes or to some part of your body, and you shift all of your focus and your awareness into that. And so it's not the same, but I think it's a comparison that you can make a jump from one to the other as far as moving your consciousness and moving your awareness. They're similar, I would say.
Right. Like your consciousness is the tool that you use to experience either this reality or other realities. And when we're talking about the mystical experience, we're talking about using that tool of consciousness to focus on and to experience what is, other than the mundane reality. Because, part of, I think, the belief system in a lot of spiritual practices that we get almost, addicted is a strong word, but we get, attached to this mundane reality, and it's hard for us to shift that conscious awareness away from it. And in varying degrees for people at different points in their journey, or just different people for whatever reason.
And different life circumstances. And yeah.
It can be difficult for people to do that, to shift away from, like when you're sitting there and trying to meditate, and your brain immediately goes, okay, let's look at the to-do list, or let's make a shopping list, or whatever. Lists are a popular one for me. Or, let's solve this problem. Let's chew on that for a bit. And what you're trying to do when you're meditating is you're trying to detach from, and we'll talk more about this, detach from that mundane state of consciousness.
Well, and I was going to say it's a perfect segue, because the next question is, what are some methods that one might use to move into those altered states? So let's talk a little about that.
Yeah, like we said, dreaming. I think one way that you could use dreaming is setting an intention before you go to sleep to, have a certain experience in a dream, or connect with, a divine presence in a dream, solve a problem. Like, you can use dreaming. That's one I would set as an example.
Practice lucid dreaming.
Yeah, if you set intentions and you consciously choose to work with that state of consciousness. Do you have a couple that you would? Or
oh gosh, well, dreaming. I think dreaming is the go-to, because that's the easiest. Everybody can do that. You just lay down and go to sleep, right? And then obviously you can work to creating specific circumstances for dreams. And I guess you could even do, people do work where, I forget what you call it, but you're working while you're asleep. You've got a recording playing that's, helping you, or, whatever. So to me, that's the easiest and most basic. But I've heard, fasting can put you into an altered state of for long periods of time, can put you in an altered state of consciousness. I have not experienced that personally. I have fasted, but not long enough for that, apparently. Sex is a way to enter an altered state of consciousness, depending. Again.
Hopefully a good one.
Traumatic injury could, and obviously that would be unintentional. But drugs would be another one that could put you into an altered, certain drugs.
Right.
Obviously, meaning certain chemicals in your brain can do so also. But daydreaming, you mentioned before, is another one that's super easy and accessible to everybody. But then obviously things like meditation, journey, astral work, and music and drumming, I think are really useful tools to helping people get into that space. Because I don't think it's as much, it's just like you were talking about in past videos, Eastern style meditation, and how difficult it can be to do that, because it's just hard to just sort of be and not get attached to the thoughts that are running through your head. And I think that it's not that the altered state is a difficult thing. It just may be difficult for people to make that bridge. And I think that there are tools such as, like I said, drumming for me is a huge one.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the Eastern meditation topic is an interesting one, and I would definitely talk about that more. When you were talking about that, I was thinking about the idea of in psychology, a lot of what you were describing would be described as disassociation. Like if you have a traumatic event, you disassociate, from your body, from this reality. So the interesting thing about altered states of consciousness is they can be something that we either choose to enter, or like you said, we don't choose to enter, that, other parts of our deeper parts of our brain, on a subconscious level, choose to kind of push us into those states as a survival mechanism. But, for the mystic, we elect to enter these states intentionally with the goal of seeking spiritual wisdom and having conversation with the divine.
Healing.
It's intentional and healing.
Yeah.
So, we intentionally do that. So depending on the tradition you're looking at, the last set of examples you gave of methods are ones that we would more commonly employ, like meditation, astral journeying, shamanic journeying, drumming, music, and in some cases use of substance, to enter states of altered consciousness. And everybody knows about the certain substances that are popular for that, like, peyote and ayahuasca and that kind of thing. I think the Eastern meditation topic is interesting because I think there's a lot of misconception about Eastern meditation. I think people think that the goal is to stop thinking, and your brain is a computer. It's designed to think. It's designed to not stop. So it's more about detachment. And essentially it's this detachment is the same thing as the disassociation. It's shifting your focus away from, that mundane reality, whether it's, shifting your focus away from your environment by closing your eyes, or, shifting yourself away from sounds you hear by not letting yourself get distracted by them. Like, that's the thing. It's the distraction is when your focus gets sucked into something. And I think the most common challenge with Eastern style meditation is more the mental part of it, where it can be, if if your foot falls asleep or something, that can be distracting while you're doing it, but trying to detach from and not have your focused concentration, your consciousness get sucked into following it. It's almost like if a thought is a train. So, they say following that train of thought. Like, if your brain wants to make the shopping list, you kind of have a choice to witness that and then detach from it, and it'll eventually just pass and move on. And I think that's the hard part. And it takes a lot of work to do that. But I think it's important to consider the fact that the goal isn't to stop thinking, because I think a lot of people assume that, and then they think that they can't do it or it's too hard. Like, you can have a session of that kind of meditation where, your brain is very active and it is distracting and it feels a little bit uncomfortable. But then you can have another session where your brain kind of, the thinking settles down, and you'll have periods, spaces between thoughts, even if they're just a second, and the more you do it, the more space you'll have between thoughts, which I think allows you to enter like a deeper state of altered consciousness. So I tend to try to do that type of meditation before I do like active imagination or journeying personally, because I find that helps. But I know for you, your experience is different. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that.
Well, first I want to touch on the disassociation piece, because I think when people hear that term, they automatically think something negative, and they think of like a disassociative episode or something where you're like, you need mental health care because you're not in reality. And while that is, yes, okay. But altered states of consciousness are absolutely disassociation from from whatever, the mundane and your physical life, your physical body, and what is happening at the moment. Yeah, I don't, well, and this goes to the topic at hand. I don't do anything before I go into an altered state to like prep other than, I mean, I do have little ritualistic steps or whatever, but like I don't have to get into, I don't do deep breathing. I don't do any of that. I just kind of go for it basically. I go through whatever steps I take and do the thing. But that is because I have a trauma that there was a trauma in my childhood that caused me to disassociate, and I learned how to do that. I learned how to enter an altered state. Like I wasn't conscious of it. It's just something that's kind of innate in me at this point. And once I got onto my spiritual path and I started, doing shamanic journey and things like that, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah.
Right.
And so I think everybody's going to have they're going to have different challenges. They're going to have different experience of trying to do any of these practices. But I can see the benefit of the way that you do it. It's just fortunately for me, I don't have to take that step, I guess.
Right. And I think like if you apply some self-discipline to your spiritual practice and you do it preferably daily and you're doing that style of meditation, like it rewires your brain. And they've done, again, I'm not a psychologist or a neurologist or anything, but it creates a groove in your brain. And, if you continuously do it in a similar way, like I have sitting beside my altar here, I have a bell that I use. So it's like when I hear that sound, my dog's like, what's going on? My brain, like, and when I sit at the altar and I light the candles and I used to have your wonderful spray, but right now I have a substitute. And I spray something or I light incense. I've done this so many times that's almost the same. It's a positive form of what you're describing, in the sense that I built up almost like a switch, like a Pavlovian kind of thing where
that's that consistency piece that we were.
Yeah. So I immediately enter an altered state of consciousness when I sit at my altar and I do those things. And then I strengthen that and deepen that by doing this is just my choice, you can also there's a guided meditation that I shared in the Patreon group, basically for past life regression, and it guides you through a process before you do the visualized part of it, where you're deepening and you're going into a deeper and deeper altered state of consciousness. So, you can achieve it in different ways. It doesn't have to be the Eastern style, and it involves, counting and breath work and that kind of thing. So I think for those of us who don't have that brain rewiring from a traumatic experience, which, unfortunately for you, I guess that is a small gift out of that experience, that you do have that ability to, and you've actually alchemized that into a part of, a powerful part of your mystical and spiritual practice. But yeah.
And well, I'm just going to say, I did a video where I talked about this once, and like the video was called "It Costs," because anytime you look at somebody and they're really good at doing something, it costs them something, whether they spent a lot of time preparing or, there's some trauma, whatever it is, like it costs something. Like it wasn't just free. Like, and that could be, from past lives or whatever, but like, that's how I look at it. Like I have this, to me, it is a good thing. I'm glad that I have this, but it cost, it had a heavy price.
And for me, I think it's a combination of both. Like I had traumatic experiences when I was young, and in retrospect, like I had out-of-body experiences and stuff, and I think that was partly what was going on, but I think it was also partly mystical in origin. So for me, it's been a combination of some of that combined with dedication and discipline and practicing. And you do have, it's like going to the gym. If you stop lifting weights, you don't have muscle anymore. You have to consistently do it. Like I used to have a Eastern meditation practice, and then I got on social media and I got online more, and I noticed that my brain changed and it became more difficult for me to do Eastern meditation. So again, it's like going back and starting again at the gym and picking up the 5-pound weight instead of the 50-pound weight and having to start, which means that my initial experience, like this morning I did a 20-minute session of Eastern style meditation. It's not what it used to be. Like my brain is way more active and way more engaged in that mundane kind of stuff, and it feels kind of not fun because your brain will go to, it's a survival, tool. It will go to the stressful things, the bad memories and stuff like that. So, but I think it's worth it. Like you said, it costs something, but I think if you're willing to make that commitment, and even if you just start with like a minute a day of any kind of meditation that works for you, whether it's Eastern style or just sitting and looking at your candle on your altar, and you go from there. It's like,
well, and it's so easy today.
Yeah.
Like there's so many guided meditations online. Like
Exactly.
it's so easy.
Right. It's like, when you're overweight and you want to start going to the gym, you don't, jump on the treadmill and run for an hour. You start by walking on the low speed for 5 minutes. So it's the same thing, it's a good analogy, I think. So, for me, it's like, it's good we're talking about this at the beginning of our kind of foundational conversation, because I do think there needs to be a foundational practice there in whatever way is comfortable for somebody, that they need to build that foundation. And I know we talked about the Christopher Penczak. Yeah. His book, The Inner Temple of Witchcraft, he has a series. He talks a lot about this kind of building this kind of foundational mental discipline before he talks about astral journeying and that kind of thing. So his book is really good if somebody's, of that pagan kind of, or witchcraft kind of.
Another good person to look at would be Damien Echols, because like he spent a long time in a jail cell with nothing but books in his mind.
Right.
Yeah.
You'd be able to become if you were so inclined, you'd be able to become an excellent meditator. If you use that time well, you could really build that muscle. So, for me, that's a foundational part of my path. And when I forget to do that work, the rest of my mystical practice and spiritual practice suffers as a result. So it's like exercise again, like finding a way that works for you. Like not everybody wants to, run or swim or whatever. You have to find what works for you. So there, like you said, there's so many tools out there, and, we're suggesting books from our path, but there's just as many good books from, Zen, Buddhist perspective, even Christian perspective. I'm sure I haven't read any, but I have read some of the Eastern stuff. 'Cause I started this journey with an interest in Buddhism and Eastern practices like Hinduism and that kind of thing, and Taoism. So, martial arts, there's lots of different avenues to the same kind of practice that then, from the point of view of a mystic, is the jumping off point.
Well, I was going to say, lastly, we were going to discuss whether or not, at least in our own opinions, altered states of consciousness are important to a mystical path and journey.
Right. Yeah, I think I answered that in saying that for me, it's a foundational, I think you're going to enter those altered states of consciousness whether you elect to or not. And you could still have mystical experience, unintentionally. But I think if you want to have a mystical practice, that intention of entering altered states of consciousness in order to do what we described, healing, conversation with the divine, gaining spiritual wisdom, you're making that contract with yourself to enter those states. So, I don't know what your thoughts are, but that's how I feel about it.
For me, it's like, I always feel like there are many roads to get to the same place. So like, no, you don't have to enter altered states of that's not a requirement, whether for anything, like for spiritual growth and development, for a mystical path, for whatever, like you don't have to consciously work to doing that. However, I would argue from my own experience that it will make your path practice and your connection with your mystical path and your spiritual path and your deity or whatever, the trees, spirit, whatever it is, that much richer and more interactive. For me, it's kind of like if you go to school and you sit in the class and you never participate, you don't turn in your work, it's not that, whatever, you still might learn something, but you're not engaged, and the teacher is not going to engage with you probably either, not in a positive way anyway. And it's not quite the same, but the more that you engage, the more you're going to get out of it. And the more you're showing your higher self, spirit, deity, whatever, that that you're here, that I showed up and I'm ready to participate and actively work on this. And like,
Yeah.
it's because again, we say this is a conversation with divinity. That's not something one does by themselves, right? It's it's a two-way street. And so, I do feel like in any practice, like we have to show up and we have to do something. And maybe altered states of consciousness are not for everybody, and that's fine. But certainly you should give it a shot. Like if you're trying to have mystical experiences and walk the mystic's path.
Right. And I mean, like, I feel like we've all had the conversation with a person who's clearly not listening to us and they just want to hear themselves talk. It's kind of like if you present that way to whatever aspect of the divine that you're wanting to connect with, they're going to feel just as put off by that as a person would, I think. So it does have to be a two-way street. But I mean, my point of view is that you're entering an altered state of consciousness anytime you have a meaningful synchronistic experience, or you feel a connection to the earth, or whatever you're experiencing that isn't mundane is an altered state of consciousness. So you can acknowledge that and choose to work with that and find ways to do that work for you, or you continue to, inadvertently bump into those states. But if you're on a path like this, you're electing to intentionally do that in one way or the other.
Right, because there is a difference between it just happening and you being an active participant and like trying to, and again, you could sit there and you can try all day long and not have a great, this fabulous mystical experience, but you're still, to me, you're building those bridges and those pathways between yourself and those mystical experiences.
Right. That's where the discipline part comes in. Like you said, you're showing up every time. It's the same whether you're working with personified deity or, you're doing a more kind of agnostic or even atheist type meditation practice. Like you show up every day and you might not get the result that you're hoping, whether that's, feeling more peaceful, sleeping better, or literally getting a clear message from, I don't know, Bridget or whatever, like you're not going to get the result every time, but if you keep showing up consistently, eventually you will. And even those of us who've been doing it for, years, we'll go through phases, sometimes long phases where, we feel like nobody's there, but we still, like, it's the faith and the commitment and that discipline that we still show up, and in the case of our type of practice, show our devotion to that particular deity that we're working with, or whatever, show up for nature, be receptive, be in that state. Yeah.
Again, you couldn't walk around having mystical experiences all day long. Like you couldn't function as a normal human being in that state. So like, that's not realistic.
No. Yeah. There's a saying that probably these days isn't politically correct, but it's something like the mystic swims in the sea that the madman drowns in or something. So like the idea is that it's like I said, it's like creating a muscle, and the mystic learns to swim, and they learn to swim by, like you'd learn to swim in a mundane way, by practicing and by, focusing on techniques and that kind of thing. So, if you don't build that muscle and you try to like just jump off the deep end into, an experience, whether that's because you chose to use like a strong substance to get you there or what have you, like you get into, a ritual situation that you're not ready to be in. And, it can, and we'll talk about this in the future, it can have consequences that you wouldn't want. So I really do think it's foundational if you want to have this type of practice to start learning to swim like that or build that muscle, whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
Agreed. To me, it is. It was very foundational in my spiritual development personally. So there's one thing that we think we might want to touch on. It might be important. There are a lot of people that are of the school of thought that entering into altered states of consciousness can be dangerous to some degree, and that there are levels of protection that may need to be taken. Erika?
So I have a couple different thoughts about this. I mean, I spent years doing this without any knowledge of what I was even really doing, and I never, ever thought about protecting myself in any regard, and I never had a bad experience. ever. The only bad experience I ever had, it was made clear to me it was my own doing, because I showed up without doing enough of that kind of detachment, and I showed up with my junk, and I tried to have a conversation with a goddess who wasn't having it, who scared me. And again, I also did some shadow work that maybe I should have prepared myself better for. So I'm kind of like on the fence with this. I feel like, yeah, there's something to that, but I also think if people don't feel called to protect themselves, they're probably going to be okay. But again, it's like, it can't hurt to do it anyway, right?
Right. Right. I have a similar, it's similar for me.
Yeah.
I've never had a negative experience with or without protection either way. Like, I don't usually do anything special for protection, though. I mean, it's going to depend. I mean, the relationship, if you have a certain relationship with a deity and you're sort of under their protection on a regular, there's all kinds of circumstances that could come into play, like you said. But I do feel like when negative stuff, like, I don't care, call it new agey if you want to, but I don't care what you call it. I believe in sort of the law of attraction. I believe if you call bad things to you, bad things will come to you. Or if you're doing shadow work and you're dragging up some bad stuff, then that bad stuff is hanging out. And then, so whether I believe we create these experiences. I've never experienced some big bad boogeyman coming to get me from outside my own experience, my own needing, my own fear, whatever, my own stuff. I'm not saying that doesn't exist. And if you feel like it does, and you have fear and you have reservations, then absolutely take X, Y, and Z steps, because there are so many books and information on the internet where people are like, yes, please protect yourselves. And I know people who are not fearful people at all, who are not doing anything that could they're not asking for trouble, as it were, who have experienced bad things while in astral, but there were similar circumstances to what you're talking about. Like,
I mean, I feel like intention is a pivotal, and this is maybe another video. Intention is so important. It's a foundational part of all of this. And I do think we can set unconscious intentions, or subconscious intentions, I should say. So it can't hurt to protect oneself. But some people take it to a level of almost like neurotic kind of paranoid kind of concern about, getting attacked by some demonic presence or something. And like, I would invite those people maybe to do some shadow work around why they're so concerned about that. But like I said, at the same time, it's kind of like, it can't hurt.
It can't
hurt to have, make a statement or have a crystal or, have a plan. If trust your intuition anywhere, whether it's in this world or other worlds. If something feels wrong, it's good to have a plan of how to handle that. There's some great books. Dion Fortune, I think, her book on psychic protection, I can't remember what it's called. Maybe that's a post I can do for Patreon, if people are part of Patreon, where I'll share something about that book. But yeah, there's lots of information out there on that. Just be wary of people who are overly concerned about danger.
And the reason we bring it up really is just because, if for nothing else, it's good to be aware. It's good to be aware that it's a potential, that there's a potential for things to go sideways, whether you ever experience that or not. And then you can take whatever steps you feel are necessary to protect yourself.
Right. Like, always trust your intuition. If something doesn't feel good, if you encounter a being, like I said, in any existence, and you get a feeling, leave, or have a plan, have some words you can say, or a symbol that you can create. There's the classic kind of pentacle. That's actually what is
the lesser banishing?
The banishing pentacle is away from you, or whatever fits with your tradition, or if there's a deity you can call in. But yeah, I think the big rules are trust your intuition. It can't hurt to have, some protection ideas and plans and tools in case you need them. And intention is everything. Those are kind of like the three things I would say about that. Do some shadow work around your intentions and around your beliefs, for sure.
We're we're over, we're at time. So
Yeah.
do you have any more thoughts you want to share? Or are you good?
No, I think we can jump onto the Patreon video and talk more deeply about this stuff. So if people
Okay.
want to become a Patreon member, they'll hear more.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. As always, it's a pleasure to chat with Erika. We love having these discussions together, and we're happy to share with you all. And we hope that you'll share your thoughts with us, anything you want to share based on what we discussed in the video. And until next time, keep exploring.
Keep exploring those altered states of consciousness.